really a big team effort, and you need a lot of people to try and coordinate that so that on Sunday you can get everything right. So how did the new corner affect the car and the tyres? Well, the reprofiling of turn 10 had opened it up. It has gone from being a very tight hairpin to now quite a reasonably fast sweeping left-hander, but also with that more open line that you can take in, you could affect the speed that you carry through 12. So in terms of the apex speed, it was about 35 kilometers an hour quicker. What did it do to the lap times? Well, that corner was about 3 to 4 tenths faster, but obviously the cars this year are a little bit slower. So overall, we were still down a bit on lap time, but that corner had made the circuit a bit quicker. And in terms of how you set the car up, well, having got rid of one of the slowest corners on the circuit, it does bias it slightly towards the medium speed, but in reality, changing just one corner hasn't had a big effect on how we run the cars in Barcelona. Why did we start on the soft tyres? Well, actually, that was very similar to what we did last year, and for similar reasons. The hard tyre wasn't working terribly well there. We had the same compound in Portimao, but round the Barcelona circuit, it just had less grip, and it was a slower tyre, and while it had good life, you wouldn't be doing a very quick stint on it. So that meant the race was probably going to be focused on the soft and the medium tyres. And also at Barcelona, you've got the third longest run down to turn 1. That's nearly 2/3 of a kilometre. And the soft tyre gives you more grip off the line. We calculate that's around one whole car length just from having that soft rubber. So when it came to it, the choice of start tyre was actually pretty straightforward, and you saw the whole of the top 10 follow suit. What happened on the start? Well, there wasn't a specific problem for Lewis, but when he got to the grid, he did comment that there was a lot of rubber on that other side that Max was starting on. So there wasn't really an advantage to the pole sitter here in terms of grip. Now, also Lewis, being the lead car, has got clear air ahead of him, and that means his car's got more drag. Where off the line, Max was able to briefly tuck in behind Lewis so he can pick up a bit of speed, and then he pulled out, and the two of them were pretty much side by side coming into the braking zone for turn 1. But within this, Max was just able to get a little bit ahead, and Lewis decided the best course of action was just to back out of it rather than risk damage to his car. So unfortunately, after his brilliant lap for his 100th pole position on Saturday, not long into the race, he's relegated to P2. And also with Lewis then being a little bit slow at turn 2, that caused Valtteri to have to lift to avoid going into the back of him, and that was what allowed Charles to go around the outside of Valtteri. So pretty disappointing to go from 1-3 to 2-4, but then the job was clear for us, was just to try and maximise as much as we can and see if we can get both cars back up the grid. Why did we leave Lewis out on the first round of pit stops? Well, actually, we were ready to box Lewis on the same lap that Max came in, and we were preparing that for the whole lap. We then heard Max say, "My tyres are gone," and shortly after that, he then came into the pits, apparently unannounced, but the team were able to get ready and do the pit stop for him. But once he'd done that, the best choice for us is actually to offset, try and create a bit of a tyre delta, and if we had stayed on a one-stop strategy mirroring Max, it just means at the end of the race, when his tyres are running out, Lewis's are a little bit fresher, and those extra few laps could have been crucial to making a pass on track if we had stayed with a one-stop. Would Lewis have passed Max without the extra stop? Well, good question, and he actually said to us after the race, I was almost about to do it, and perhaps you should have left me out, I'd have done it on track. And that looked like it was quite possible. I think with the fresher tyres that were on Lewis's car, it would have probably happened at some point, because Max would have started to get pretty significant degradation towards the end of the race. However, if we had done that, you then have the disadvantage almost of being the race leader, and Max could have done to Lewis what we did to him. So he could have converted to a two-stop as soon as Lewis had overtaken him, and this might have happened around the point that we decided to pull the trigger on the extra stop anyway. So in some ways, it was actually better to not do that overtake on track. Use the fact that for Lewis, he was in P2 and the worst case scenario of the extra stop was that he'd finish up in P2. So for us, it was worth the gamble, but there was less chance that Max, as the race leader, was going to make that move for the extra stop. So when did we decide to convert to the two-stop strategy with Lewis? Well, this is actually something that we're managing and monitoring throughout the race. And one of the key questions is, what was the degradation that we were actually getting during the race? The conditions were quite different to those that we'd seen in free practice. But from the runs that Lewis and Max were doing, we could see that the tyres were dropping, and they were dropping a bit more than we'd expected from our pre-event simulations, where we actually thought a one-stop and a two-stop were very, very close in terms of performance. What we could start to see when we took that degradation and put it into our linear strategy tools was that the two-stop was now coming out as a clear winner. And the point that we actually decide to trigger the stop, well, really that's the point that we're talking about calling the driver in and getting the pit crew out. But when we got into that second stint, that was when we really started seriously thinking about making this happen. We're checking the degradation, so we're making sure that Lewis can actually catch up on that other set. We're making sure that when he does catch Max, he's got the pace to be able to overtake him. And for a lot of that stint, we were actually just reviewing the optimum lap. We knew it was somewhere in that 40 to 43 region. And if we go too early, by the time he catches Max, his tyres haven't got enough grip to be able to pass. If we go too late, we haven't given him enough laps remaining in the race to be able to actually catch and attack. So as I said, it was really just a case of fine-tuning, but the decision isn't taken until we decide to actually pull the trigger and go for it. Why didn't Valtteri let Lewis go earlier? Well, Valtteri's in his own race. One of the things we'd said to Valtteri was try and build this gap to Leclerc, although their lap times were starting to get more similar as Valtteri's tyres were wearing out. So he's trying to push as fast as he can. He then got the message not to hold Lewis up, and he would have been able to let him go by much more easily if Lewis had got DRS the lap before they actually passed. Now, Lewis was within 1.01 seconds of Valtteri, so only 1/100th of a second from getting DRS, and if he had, it would have been much easier for Valtteri to let him go on the straight. Unfortunately though, when Lewis is a second behind, Valtteri's going to lose around 2 seconds if he just backs off to let him go. So it was really that balance between his own race and Lewis's race that led to the loss there. But reviewing it, well, given that Valtteri's tyres had run out shortly after that, given that he had to overtake the Ferrari on track anyway, we would have probably triggered it earlier, brought Valtteri in for a new set. He would have passed Charles relatively easily, and that situation would have meant that Lewis had lost less time, and importantly, Valtteri would have lost less time. Why did we stop Valtteri for a second time? Well, after Lewis and Valtteri had passed on track, Valtteri come on the radio to say his tyres weren't in great shape. And what he meant there was, I've lost a lot of rear grip. They basically run out of rubber, and you get quite a sudden drop that he was feeling on that lap. So if we'd left him out, the times would have just got slower and slower and slower, and it would have been bad for his overall race. So we decided to come in at that stage, take a new set. Now, that does mean that we're not in great place to go for the fastest lap, because the ideal time for that is you take a set right at the end of the race when the fuel load is at its lowest. But as it happens, we didn't really have the rubber to do that. So when it's possible for us to seriously challenge for fastest lap, we always will. But the key thing is we actually maximise the finishing position, and securing first and third was the key thing for us on this day. And as it happens, Max was able to do a very fast lap at the end and take that for himself. How many people are actually involved in making the strategy? Well, you'll know James Vowles, who often presents these race debriefs, and he's the final person taking that decision on the pit wall. But he's working with a group of people, many of them back here in Brackley, who are feeding information in, looking at what the other cars are doing, advising, and also populating the tools. So it's quite a team. But on top of that, we've also got people looking at the tyres, for instance, trying to understand what's going on there. So it really is a team effort. We've got many people, even volunteers, who are here listening to the radios of the other cars, advising us on messages that are coming out from other drivers. So really a big team effort, and you need a lot of people to try and coordinate that so that on Sunday you can get everything right. How did we find so much pace in a few weeks? Well, it's fair to say that following Bahrain tests, we were struggling a bit with the car. We hadn't got it into a good window. The drivers were talking about how they didn't have the confidence to carry the speed into the corners. The car wouldn't even turn very well in the corners. It was difficult to get it round some of the tight corners there, and we were losing time. And then also the rear end was struggling. When you got on the power, it was quite oversteery. So we had a lot to put right. Now there was a great deal of work back here in Brackley, also in Brixworth on the power unit side, because we could see a few things in terms of the handling of the car that wasn't where we wanted it to be, and equally on the power unit side, there were a few areas that we could improve there in terms of the delivery of that power. So most of it was really hard work and fine-tuning. We had numerous sessions in the simulator trying to get everything in the right window. And when we went back to Bahrain, well, we weren't the quickest. That was clearly Red Bull, and we saw that in qualifying. But we did have a car in a place where we could actually compete with them. We had improved the long runs significantly, and that was really the thing that allowed us to win that first race in Bahrain. We've also had an update kit on the car in Imola, and we're looking for small improvements really. There's so little between us and Red Bull that every few milliseconds we're chasing after. So in summary, it isn't one thing. A bit of it is performance that we're bolting on with upgrades, but a lot of it was really just understanding the issues and getting the car into a good place and allowing the drivers to have a car that they have confidence in and they can push to the limits. And we're going to keep doing that because I'm sure there's more to come. So thank you for your questions. We will be back in 2 weeks after the Monaco Grand Prix.
Can we do that again, but without the so at the beginning, please?
I've got better at not saying so. Thank you for your questions. We'll be back in 2 weeks after the Monaco Grand Prix.